One of the most prevalent forms of contemporary racism in U.S. schools is deficit thinking, which takes the position that minority students and families are at fault for students' poor academic performance. Deficit thinking assumes that students of color enter school without normative cultural knowledge or skills and assumes that parents neither value nor support their child's education. Deficit approach begins with overgeneralizations about family background and is exacerbated by a limited framework to interpret how individuals view education. Representations of deficit thinking in films are often paired with the ever too familiar white female teacher savior character, like Luann in Dangerous Minds, who faces long odds when attempting to change the lives of at-risk youth. Because the white female teacher possesses capital that is considered valuable to society, the logic is that if students can perform in the right ways, then they can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and embrace their share of the American dream. Society insists that young people be held responsible for their educational outcomes when we have not demonstrated an equal level of responsibility towards them and their educational well-being. Across the nation, high minority and high poverty schools are disproportionately overcrowded with decaying facilities, unqualified teachers, larger class sizes, less challenging courses, lower quality and quantity of instructional materials, fewer extracurriculars, less funding, and more. Highlighting the voices of our nation's inner city students prove that discourse regarding a culture of poverty plaguing inner city youth is far from the truth. Yet culture of poverty discourse mirrors popular representations of students of color and their educational experiences in films today. For example, the breadth of introductions viewers receive of students in Dangerous Minds is limited to profane rap lyrics, students sexually harassing teachers, and behavior that leads staff to cement characterizations of them as rejects from hell. The assumption is that Luann will come in and be able to rid them of their cultural deficiencies and lead them into a successful future. Community cultural wealth offers an approach that identifies, analyzes, and challenges such distorted notions of people of color. Community cultural wealth is a collection of knowledge, contacts, and abilities utilized by communities of color to survive and resist forms of oppression, including the use of aspirational, linguistic, familial, social, navigational, and resistant capital. Representations of community cultural wealth are not popular in the film industry today. However, notable films such as Brooklyn Castle can be contrasted with films such as Dangerous Minds to portray the way in which films like Dangerous Minds are falsified in derogatory representations of students of color. In comparison, Brooklyn Castle is about students who attend IS 318, a Title I school in Brooklyn where 70% of students fall below the poverty line and the vast majority are students of color. Brooklyn Castle does not separate the students from their racial and economic experiences. However, the children and families in Brooklyn Castle are shown to have a notable amount of each type of capital. For example, Pobo, a main character in Brooklyn Castle, demonstrates an extreme amount of aspirational capital, which is the ability to hold on to hope in the face of structured inequality. Although he experiences continued structural inequality due to economic circumstance and continually limited school funding, Pobo shares his dream of becoming president throughout the film. He remains determined to fight against injustice in school funding. Alex Paredes, from a family of immigrants, demonstrates an admirable amount of linguistic capital, as he is often responsible for translating for his parents who are not native English speakers. Yet perhaps the most notable form of capital displayed by the Paredes is familial capital. Brooklyn Castle repeatedly draws attention to the quiet heroism of Alexis's mom and dad, who immigrated to the U.S. in pursuit of a better life for their son. Both mom and dad are shown to be heavily involved and invested in Alexis's education, despite having limited language skills and working long hours. Students in the film are shown to possess a tremendous amount of social capital, as they appear to draw on the strength of their community for support in their varied experiences. Not to be left out is the notable amount of navigational and resistant capital displayed by communities of color in the film. Well aware of the structural inequality they are up against, parents, students, and the school community consistently raise their voices in an effort to resist such inequality by contacting government officials, organizing massive fundraisers, and making sure the community was well informed and engaged in advocacy efforts. Needless to say, films such as Brooklyn Castle speak to the causal link between funding and educational opportunity, while on the contrary, films such as Dangerous Minds disguise racism in a rhetoric of values and culture that are falsely implied to be causal in educational outcomes. Brooklyn Castle mirrors the main goals of documenting community cultural wealth by transforming understandings of education and showing empowered people of color utilizing assets already abundant in their communities.